till the green.
Hello? Hello? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Levels on my end anyway.
All right, you want to just, do we need to test it? We're on, so just tell me if we can hear. Hello, hello, hello.
Are you going to be here maybe? Here for you?
Whatever. I mean, I don't know, people, ooh, hold on. Can you hear me?
People are sitting here.
Well, they won't see. Yeah, I don't think people should sit here because they won't see.
So I'll turn like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think they'll be able, they won't be able to see. Yeah, so you should sit here, exactly. Oh, hi. So, should I take this off? How do I turn it on? Yep, yep. Maybe I should. Ooh. That's fine. Oh. I know. I know. It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of. I can't speak because it's on. It's a lot of people.
What did you say? You can't.
Because it's
So
on,
I'll screen.
so they hear everything I say.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Jane Lampert. I'm the Senior Director of Development, for JFS of Metro West. I'm in my favorite place on behalf of my favorite organization. First of all, I just want to thank the JFS Board Committee for Board Engagement and Education, Stephanie Alkine, Jeff Schwartz, and Jody Gray, and our president supporting us, Allison Cates, thank you. And on behalf of Ashir Tikva, Rabbi Danny, and Leah, thank you for everything. And that's my speech. I just want to introduce my dear friend Jill Karp, who's going to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. And thank you to everyone in this room today for being here and caring about Israel and willing to learn, and I hope promising to do more to keep our beloved Israel and its people safe. We are all grief-stricken with the evil that took place on October 7th, and we soon realized Israel and the world has been shifted and changed forever. We have been bombarded with images, stories, and paralyzed by the news and information constantly coming at us. We are witnessing anti-Semitism at a whole new level in our daily lives. In fact, anti-Semitism is up 700%. We ask ourselves, what can we do? We feel desperate to connect with each other and our homeland. When our mission sister reached out to her Boston mission sisters from a life-changing trip that we took 8 years ago, some of us are here tonight, we connected once more. Suggesting bringing our dear Lyana here, who was our guide through a life-changing trip in Israel, to show our love, learn, and support the soldiers. And here we are, feeling helpless, but wanting to help. We all want to be a part of the light, to bring light and to find it together in the darkness. Lyana is here to tell us the truth, share her personal experiences, and help us to bear witness. The stakes are high. They've never been higher. We are confronting horror marked with a brutality reminiscent of the Holocaust, targeted once again for our identity, being a Jew. Lyana will help us to understand why it is different this time, and the defining difference that today we have the State of Israel and the amazing IDF. We are very privileged and blessed to have Israel, and I believe it is a responsibility to keep it that way. Every day I open my eyes and check the news. The first thing I think of is the hostages who remain in captivity. I pray for the soldiers on the front lines, and I try to do whatever I can to make a difference and a presence. We are all giving and supporting. But if we ask ourselves, are we doing all we can do? Well, now is our time, 150%. Every avenue, in every way possible, because if not now, when, and never again is truly right now. We are at a pivotal moment and at risk for our children and our grandchildren. I hope today that you will be inspired to get committed and involved and bring light into the world. Thank you for choosing to be here and for building the strong Jewish communities that you are all a part of. On a personal note, having just returned from Israel a few weeks ago, I visited hostages' families, wounded warriors at Sheba Medical Center, tank units on the border of Gaza, Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which Lyana will show you, attended a hostage ceremony at the Kotel in Jerusalem, visited startups and farms, spent time with helicopter pilots and brothers and sisters in arms, learning and reflecting in prayer. And I felt safe, in some ways safer than in America. But I quickly realized there is a before and after. And if we don't step up and speak up, we are in deep trouble. I am going to let Lyana tell you the rest of the story. But first, let me tell you who Lyana is. She is a creative and distinct public speaker and historian. She teaches the biblical heritage of the land of Israel. She guides and enlightens leaders, political groups, interfaith and intergenerational groups, and families just like us. Lyana is an amazing warrior, educator, tour guide, and mother of 4 children, both serving in the military and the community. Her daughter is a bereavement officer in the IDF. She lives in Modin, between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and she is going to share with us how it has impacted her family, Israeli society, and all of us, sharing firsthand the accounts of this difficult time. But she will also inspire us with her stories of bravery and the many volunteer efforts of Israeli society and the military. You will be inspired. And with that, I give you Lyana.
Okay, so, yeah, I hate this. Okay, so we actually, Jill, do you want to say something about that?
This is a card. Our sister Wendy Pollins made cards sent to the soldiers and wrote a little note and put her WhatsApp on it. And he has been WhatsApping her, and he keeps it in his pocket. And so, having visited a tank unit on the border, notes that people write, they're like on their bunks and they're in their pockets, and it's all so sweet. So Wendy has made cards. So on your way out, we have cards, and if you write a little note, you can write to a hostage family, you can write to a wounded warrior, you can write to an IDF soldier, and they'll be brought back to Israel, and you can put your number on it if you'd like, your information, and maybe someone will contact you, but it'll be we just want to show them a little love. So something we have for you on the way out.
So thank you. I promise you that they will contact you because I've done the same. And I'll share with you later things that I've done, and you'll see some of the messages that I've received. So you should know that anything that you do, any notes that you write, is part of really the message that we're here to talk about today, and that's the message of together we will win, beyachad nenatzeach, which is really the spirit of what's been going on in Israel. Is the sound okay? It's not too loud? Okay, great. Okay, so that's really why I called this Beyachad Nenatzeach, because what I really want to share with you is where we are in Israel today, where we were before, and what the challenges are that we're dealing with. And as Jill said, I really hope that you will be inspired because as someone who grew up in Israel, whilst I don't sound like it, I do it. And I've experienced many different wars and many, many different things that have been going on. The feeling in Israel today is something that is unique. And what Jill described in her experience, and anyone who comes, in fact, experiencing something very, very different and very, very deep. So the Israel that you know from before and the Israel that is today is a very, very different Israel, and I hope to share that with you. But this is where I've come from. And I have come to you from the war. I have come to you from a reality that October 7th really is a life-changing, pivotal event. It is really I would say, a shift in paradigm. And when we talk about events such as these, and when we try to sort of understand what it is that we're talking about, I do want to sort of take you back a moment and to say that there were other events in our history that were not only life-changing, but certainly were these sort of shift in paradigms that have had an impact on us. And October 7th is right up there. So if I very quickly take you back to almost the beginning, right? And we go back to the time of the Bible, and you all remember that we had an independent kingdom. David was the king, and Solomon was the king, and we lived in our own land. And where I live, Modi'in, was actually in the heart. And about 400 years after that, we were conquered by the Babylonians, and we were exiled. And that first time that we were exiled from our land, many of the things that we do today as Jews begin with that experience by the rivers of Babylon, we sat, we wept, and we remembered Zion. And that understanding that whilst we did have an independent country, there are things that are not guaranteed. And that was the first time that we had to contend with the fact that living in our own land was not necessarily something that would last forever. And how do we deal with that shift in paradigm? But we return, we rebuild, and I would say the larger impact was the destruction of the Second Temple. When we were then exiled after the Romans destroyed the temple, and you may remember that part of what led to that destruction was the hatred, the intolerance, the very, very violent, not only actions but also words that culminated in the destruction of the temple and the exile to the rest of the world and the beginning of 2,000 years of exile. And once again, many of the things that we do today, including sitting in a sanctuary, in a synagogue, temple, is exactly a direct result of that event. Because if you'd stop to think for a moment, the fact that we're here as the Jewish people 2,000 years later is a miracle. Because without a temple, how could you be Jewish? Everything that you did as a Jew up until that point was centered around Jerusalem and the temple. And how can we, in fact, live a full Jewish life without a temple? And yet, our leadership, our rabbis were brilliant. Right, Rabbi? Rabbis are brilliant. Just making sure. Okay? Always figure out ways for us to reroute, regroup, a little bit of loophole sometimes. And what's amazing is that we took a terrible tragedy, which could have culminated in the disappearance of the Jewish people, and we rose from that to create an incredible people that continue to live and survive. And the fact that you guys are all nodding your heads, I love that. Because none of us have seen the temple, none of us have gone to the temple, but that memory, that feeling of connection is exactly who we are. And so if we move forward in terms of one other, I would say, major event, and we go to the Middle Ages and we talk about the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, once again, that is a pivotal moment that is transformative in terms of who we are as a people. In the world of before and the world of after, very, very different worlds. And there are a couple of things, there are many things that came out of that, but two that I just want to mention here that we do, and I don't know how many of you are aware that they developed as a result of that, which is why our Jewish life and our Jewish existence are so impacted by these unbelievable, tragic events from which we rose. The first is when you come to synagogue on Friday night and you participate in a Kabbalat Shabbat service. That Kabbalat Shabbat service, as we know it, with many of the songs that we sing, develops in Tzfat in the 16th century as a result of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and the need to regroup. And something even deeper than that, which is part of our DNA, right? We all engage in something that is called Tikkun Olam. We talked about this, repairing the world. Repairing the world, this Kabbalistic notion, was one of the ways to engage the Jewish people in understanding that being Jewish doesn't mean that you have to be down in the dredges. But from terrible tragedies, we can be empowered to understand that, in fact, we have a mission in the world. And when I talk about Tikkun Olam, to me, this concept of us partnering with God to be agents of change in the world, to make the world a better place, there is nothing more empowering than that. We were placed on this earth not just as mundane people, but we are partnered with the highest possible authority, and we have a mission. So we could have rolled down and died and said, okay, they've expelled us, and they put us on the rack, and they burnt us at the stake. But no, we rose from that, and we rerouted like ways, and we figured out a way how to build on that tragedy. And the worst of all, certainly in our lifetime, is, of course, World War II and the Holocaust. The world of before, not just the Jewish world, the world of before and the world of after are two very, very different worlds. The language is different. Our psyche is different. Our understanding of who we are is different. And the creation of the State of Israel, in spite of the Holocaust, not because of the Holocaust, is an unbelievable thing. Because whilst, again, 1/3 of the Jewish people was annihilated, once again, we could have said, okay, that's it, we give up, what more can we do? And yet we rise from that to create an amazing state, and the fact that you're all here today showing your support is an unbelievable testament to that, okay? And when that state was created with the promise or with the hope that it would be a safe haven to the Jewish people. It would be a place where we could go and not be persecuted, a place where we could go and not be murdered, a place where we could go and feel safe. And so this picture that I brought you today is a picture of Rabbi Lau, who is a Holocaust survivor, the chairman of Yad Vashem, survived the Holocaust at the age of 8, sitting with one of our famous performers, Lyana Rotstein, who we're going to talk about later, and some of you may recognize him as one of the stars of Fauda, if anybody's seen Fauda, okay? But the reason I bring him here is because in this unbelievable meeting, Lyana Rotstein writes a song describing Rabbi Lau's experience, which impacted him to the core. Because when Rabbi Lau was 5 years old, he was not yet a rabbi then, right? He was 5. But when he was 5, the very first of many traumatic events was to see his family, his community being rounded up, and his father being beaten by the Nazis because he would not cut his side locks. Now, what does a 5-year-old do when he sees his father being beaten to death, and then they are loaded, he and his brother, onto a truck, which then takes them to a train, which then brings them to Buchenwald. And when they get to Buchenwald, his brother Naftali says to him, "We don't have a father, we don't have a mother. I'm going, and I don't know if we're going to survive. But if by some miracle you survive this hell on earth, remember that there is only one place to go. Eretz Israel, the land of Israel." And he says to him, "Repeat after me, the land of Israel." Why? Because it is our home. They do not kill Jews there. It is our home. Okay? How is it that 75 years later, the worst day in Jewish history, with the largest number of Jews massacred, burnt, mutilated, dismembered, happens in our independent country that was supposed to be a safe haven to the Jews? How is it that in a single day, 27 different locations are attacked simultaneously by the most brutal, genocidal, dehumanizing attack that one could ever imagine? And I bring you this map because I want you to understand that it was a very organized, orchestrated attack. This is actually not an attack. This was an invasion. This was a planned invasion that was executed to perfection. And the trauma that we are still dealing with is, how could that have happened? How could we have been attacked? How could we have been caught so off guard? And look at the numbers. 1,300, actually 1,400 massacred in a single day. To date, 562 soldiers have died in battle. 861 people injured. That includes civilians and soldiers. 240 hostages. Might I remind you that today there are still 136 hostages, 120 days into the war. Okay? And 12,500 launches. Thank you. The reason I bring that is because what would that mean here in America? What would those numbers mean to you in the United States in a single day? So that would mean that you would have close to 9,000 people kidnapped. You would have 54,400 people injured. You would have close to 4.3 million launches of missiles in a single day on all of your population centers. I want that to sink in. Okay? This is what Israel experienced on October 7th. And while when you look at the numbers objectively, they may not sound as so big, the impact is huge. What that basically means is that we have gone back to the War of 1948. And the reason I bring this to you is that this is a reservist soldier, and we will talk about the reservists. But this is a man who's been fighting in Gaza. And when you fight in Gaza, you are not fighting only the terrorists, you are also dealing with infrastructure. You are going to people's homes because unfortunately those homes are being used as bases of operation. There are many entrances into the tunnels that begin in the homes. And when you enter the homes, what you find is that in the population, not Hamas activists, not necessarily Hamas terrorists, but what we would call civilian population, this map recurs over and over and over again. And you say to me, big deal, Lyana, it's a map of Israel in Arabic, right? That's what we would expect to see in Gaza. But when you look at the map carefully and you check the names of the places that are mentioned on this map, one would expect that the Arab towns would be Arab names and the Jewish towns would be Hebrew names transliterated into Arabic, except that there are no Jewish names on this map. There is no Tel Aviv, and there is no Haifa, There is no Modi'in. None of the towns are there. Why? Because the towns that are there take you back to pre-1948. And for the first time, not for us, but I think it's time that people understand that what we are talking about is not where the lines are going to be drawn. Is this a two-state solution? Is it going to be here, there, or anywhere? What you're looking at is a map that is telling you that it is not about two states, but it is a map about a one state replacing Israel. This is a map that is talking about the fact that Israel does not have a right to exist. And this is why the war of post-October 7th is a very, very different war. And from an Israeli perspective, this is a war for our survival. This is a war for our existence. This is a war, first and foremost, for the legitimacy of our survival in the first place. And when you deal with that sort of genocidal ideology that dehumanizes Jews, that orchestrates this sort of an attack, that uses the population that we gave work permits because we thought that by allowing them in and working in our farms and giving them medical treatment in our hospitals and trying to broker peace, which was what many of these communities believed in, they used these people, in fact, to gather intel so that when they invaded Israel, they all had very, very detailed maps of every single community. They knew where the weapons were, they knew where the houses were, they knew exactly where to navigate. And this is what we're dealing with. And when you want to wreak that sort of havoc, this is not some sort of spontaneous eruption of hatred. You have to bring with you the materials that will cause this sort of destruction. You have to put them on drugs so that they are not afraid, but that they are exhilarated in what they are doing. And this is the result of many, many, many years of education, of seeing us that, meaning that this is what should be. We are not worthy of existence in the land. And then you get that. These are bodies, right? You get the idea that you come into somebody's home and you pull them out of the bed and you rape them, you murder them in front of their children, or you put their children inside an oven and you burn them, or you burn entire bodies, entire families. This is very, very different in terms of the violence, in terms of the orchestration, in terms of the ideology that perpetuates this. And when you go and read the Hamas Charter of 1988, they explicitly tell you what they want to do. And part of our challenge is that our enemies have over and over again told us what they were going to do, and we kept saying they don't actually mean it. That can't really be true. And we have to start to stand up and to understand that they've told us what they're going to do, and we have to take notice and start to deal with it, because that's then what happens. 1,400 people are massacred in a single day. Young people singing and dancing in a music festival, which was a bonus because Hamas didn't know that they were going to be there, but added to the body count. And as I don't have to go into what else they did. And so, I bring this to you because this particular graffiti that I saw in Jerusalem, to me, represents where we are and represents what we're dealing with. It's not a question of whether you like the government or you don't like the government, whether you like Bibi or you don't like Bibi, whether you are for the judicial reform or against the judicial reform. That is, as we say in Israel, October 6th conversation. That's no longer the conversation in Israel, because this is a much, much deeper issue that is, in fact, a global issue of the forces of good and light and humanity and justice versus the forces of evil, and just think back to the couple of slides before. And so what I want to share with you is some of these amazing heroic stories to understand why, since October 7th, we are speaking a different language in Israel that doesn't always sort of follow in tune with some of the language or some of the conversation that is spoken outside of Israel. So this is Kfar Aza, and Kfar Aza is literally right on the border with the Gaza Strip. And this is the young people's neighborhood, because when you live on a kibbutz and you reach the age of 18, you're now an adult and you don't have to live at home anymore. So you get your little cubicle and you live there either alone or you may live there with a girlfriend, boyfriend. But they are also on the fringe so that they don't disrupt the community with their partying and their dancing and their singing, which means that on the day of the invasion, they were the first. They were the ones that were encountered by the terrorists. So we're talking about kids who are 20, 21, 22, they're my children's ages. And one of the kids is Netta Epstein, who is there with his girlfriend. Remember that we're talking October 7th, Shabbat, Simchat Torah, okay? 6:30, the alarm goes off, and they're in their safe room, and all of a sudden they hear Arabic. This is not a regular attack. What is Arabic doing on the kibbutz on Shabbat morning? You don't have workers coming in on Shabbat. And then they understand that something different is going on, and while they come out to try to understand, they're holding the door to their cubicle, and it's pushed open, and a terrorist throws in a grenade. And Netta catches the grenade and throws it out. But the terrorist doesn't give up and throws it in again. And once again, Netta throws it out. And then he throws it in again, and at that point, Netta says, I can't keep doing this back and forth, and I have to make a decision what I am going to do. And Netta decides at a split second that he's going to jump on the grenade, and he's going to sacrifice his own life in order to save his girlfriend's life. 23 years old. You might expect that from somebody, I don't know, my age, but certainly not someone who's 23. But it's not over, because they're outside. And how is she going to survive? She just saw her boyfriend die in front of her eyes, but she's got to save herself. And so if the terrorist comes in and finds her, that's it. So what she does is she takes Netta's body, or what's left of it, and she pulls it over her and covers herself so that when the terrorist comes in, they don't see her. And they just see a dead body and destruction, and they move on. So she survives. She physically survives. She is now dealing with a tremendous amount of trauma, which is not post, but is ongoing, perpetual. The other amazing story is the story of the city of Sderot, which is on the northeastern corner of the Gaza Strip. 40,000 people live in Sderot, and on that morning, you have an army of terrorists in white Toyota vans that basically infiltrate the town, and their target is the police station in Sderot. The police station is like a fortified fortress, all right? And the idea is that if you take control of that building, you take control of the roofs, and you're high up. And so as they are getting into the building, there are policemen and women who are there, who are doing whatever they can in the stairwells, in the rooms, in order to shoot the terrorists and prevent them from getting up. And we have one brave SWAT person outside who grabs a rifle and is able to shoot one of the terrorists who was not in the police station but on the building next door in order to take him out so that the forces could come in to start to try and counter this attack. Because it is such a fortified building, it took 18 hours in order to take the terrorists out, and eventually the building had to be destroyed. So that all that's left today is that big open lot that I showed you, and a memorial to the heroism of the men and women who fought valiantly against the terrorists who invaded Sderot. The last story that I want to share with you is a story that takes place in a city called Ofakim. For those who don't know the map of Israel, Ofakim is a 30-minute drive east of Sderot. 30-minute drive. So a terrorist was able to get in the car and drive for 30 minutes in Israel, unstopped, into a town and take over a neighborhood. Yigal, who was a senior policeman, when he heard about the attack and knew about the Nova Music Festival, went there to help the young people. And then he finds out that his own city is under attack, and he comes back, doesn't even go home. And when he goes into the neighborhood, he's wearing all of his gear. And so he says to his people, he says, come stand behind me, I'm protected, I have my gear, you don't put yourself in harm's way, I'm going to go straight ahead. Not knowing that the building that was on his right had already been taken over by a terrorist. And as he moves in this direction, he's hit here, in the one place where he was not protected, and Yigal is killed on the spot. But thanks to that, the other policemen were able to take cover and ultimately take out the terrorists that were there and protect the neighborhood. What's amazing about this particular house is that there was an older woman who lived there. Her name was Rachel. And I don't know how she had the wherewithal to do what she did, but she wanted to keep the terrorists busy. She didn't want them to hurt her. So she says to them, 7 o'clock in the morning, you guys must be tired, you guys must be thirsty, you guys must be hungry. And she starts to make them tea, and then she makes them coffee, and then she gives them her famous chocolate chip cookies. And these people are eating and they're drinking, and she's having conversation with them. And for 7 hours, she keeps them busy. And eventually her son is able to help get her out, and she survives. Okay? And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the street art that was done in Tel Aviv basically in her honor to describe the superwoman, Rachel, which to me is another way of resilience in Israel. Because what do we do with these stories? Do we lay down and say, oh my God, we've just had a terrible terrorist attack? That's it. Or do we say, these stories are amazing stories, how are we going to build out of them, how are we going to learn from them, and how are we going to overcome them and move forward? And so the spirit in Israel is this. When we talk about Am Yisrael Chai, what we talk about is being united in the home front, and that is going to make us united and victorious on the front lines. And so wherever you go, I am obsessed with these signs. Obsessed. My friends make fun of me. I'm clicking everywhere I go. Because it is amazing to me that on October 6th you wouldn't have seen any of this. But from October 7th, the only message that everybody is talking about is being strong and supporting. But I want to remind you where we were before, which is why I am so obsessed with this. Because on October 6th, or leading up to October 6th, you were all following, right? We had 5 elections in 4 years, disastrous. We were unable to make a government. The government that we finally get, half of the people like it, half of the people don't like it. And remember what I said about the destruction of the Second Temple? We were there, or almost there, because the language was violent, because the weekly demonstrations were increasingly not only growing in numbers, but growing in the violent language that was being used. And the hatred that was being expressed was really horrific. It was in our gut. Now, I will say that it was amazing that 3.5 months, 4 months of demonstrations, the fact that they were relatively quiet, the fact that nobody was arrested, the fact that we didn't have any riots going on, is a testament to who we are as a people, and is a testament to the strength of our democracy, that we allowed, as we should have, people to stand and exercise their right to demonstrate. But what culminated on Yom Kippur in Dizengoff Square, had it happened anywhere outside of Israel, everybody would have been up in arms saying, what sort of anti-Semitic activity is that? How can it be that in a public square in Tel Aviv, where there have been prayers every year, this was not the first year, that secular Jews are attacking religious Jews as they are attempting to pray. And at that point, it doesn't matter anymore what the argument is, because we're talking about the holiest day of the Jewish year, a day where we are supposed to be forgiving, a day where we are supposed to be reconciling. And to turn that into a confrontation, that was very upsetting to many, many, many Israelis. It was so upsetting that this is down the street from my house. This is the house of the justice minister. You didn't know that Modin was such an important place, did you? Right? Okay. So the justice minister, this is what the demonstrations look like. Week after week after week, and the numbers were growing. The flag was being used, right? And then those countering it were also using the flag. So is the flag for the demonstration? Is the flag against the demonstration? Everybody thinks that they're fighting for the true character of the state of Israel. Flag is not something unifying anymore. The flag is something dividing. And that's the language. Yariv Levin, enemy of the people. It doesn't matter anymore now whether you are for or against. When this is the type of rhetoric that you see, when somebody comes and writes that on the house, we have moved to another level in terms of the divisiveness, in terms of the antagonism, in terms of where we were, in terms of the eve of the destruction of the Second Temple all over again. And not many people know, but we were already at a point where there were maps being drawn about how we were going to divide the land, not between us and the Arabs, but between Jews and Jews. The land of Israel, okay, or the state of Israel, was going to be the state of Tel Aviv and a little bit around them. And the state of Judah or Judea was going to be those messianic settlers, and we were going to divide the land. That's where we were. And who was listening to all of this? Our enemies. But that's what it looks like today. This is Yariv Levin's house today. So starting October 7th, it is a different conversation. And now when we come to stand in front of his house, we're no longer talking about him being the enemy of the people. And we're no longer talking about whether we are for the judicial reform or not, because we are coming together because there are bigger issues. There are more important issues that we have to deal with. But I just want to remind you that the flag was for both. And then that happens. This is a little bit after October 7th. And the flag that was dividing us became the flag that was uniting us. Because what happens on October 7th? I'll share with you what happened to me on October 7th. October 7th, Simchat Torah, the very end of the Jewish holiday month, right? And in Israel, the Chagim are a full month. You can't talk to anybody during that time. You can't close a deal at that time. Everything stops. And Simchat Torah is the last joyous day where people are dancing and singing in the streets with the Torah. Services go forever. At some point, you're like, all right, enough already. But it's all on and on. It's a happy, happy day. And I wake up in the morning. I'm observant. I don't turn on my phone on Shabbat. I don't turn on the TV on Shabbat. Where I lived, there were no sirens at 6:30 in the morning. And I'm getting up and I'm getting ready and getting dressed to go to synagogue. And I start to hear boom, boom, boom. And you say to yourself, what's going on, right? What is this? I say, oh, maybe it's not anything important, but it keeps going. Boom, boom, boom. And then I say, can this really be an interception of the Iron Dome? Is there something going on that I don't know? Is that really the situation? Get dressed, start to go to synagogue. The streets are deserted. Like there is nobody walking in the street at 9 o'clock in the morning. That is unheard of on Simchat Torah. And as I'm walking, it's not that far of a walk, there were two people that rushed. I couldn't even stop them. And when I get to, first I go to a women's prayer group. It's not that important, but when I get there, there were very few people, okay? And they're rushing through. And at the end, they say, okay, we're going to do this very fast. We're shortening everything because of the situation. And I'm in the dark. I have absolutely no idea what's going on. I say, what? And they say, you haven't heard? And I say, no. And they say, there's been an invasion. There's people hurt. There's terrorists. People are getting called up. But we still don't know. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, right? Information is not yet coming through. And I say, okay. And I go to my synagogue, where usually prayers are till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm there at 9:30, and they're already towards the end of the Torah service. And as the person's reading Torah, somebody rushes in, pats him on the shoulder, whispers something in his ear. He drops everything, and he walks out. So somebody else who knew how to read is there, but that doesn't last more than 2 minutes. And his pager, because he works in security, goes off, and he doesn't say a word, and he drops everything, and he goes off. And you're beginning to understand that something is not right. And there's something here that's not sitting well with you. And they say, okay, we're going to rush things up. We're going to wrap it up. We don't have time. I go home. 11 o'clock, we have a siren. We have a siren. We go into our safe room. 10 minutes later, we come out, and we see our neighbor, his son, dressed in uniform, on his phone, heading out. 10 minutes later, our other neighbor puts on his uniform, doesn't explain what's going on, is on his phone, and he's leaving. And now you're understanding that this is something else. And a little bit of information is coming, and I'll tell you that on Saturday night, when I turned on the phone and I turned on the television, it was like I was punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not breathe. And the question is how, and the question is why, and the question is what? And then the next thing I do is I remember that my cousin lives in a kibbutz, Karmia, right next to Zikim, which was one of the bases that was attacked. And I call her, and she says, don't worry, we're fine. We evacuated to my mother's house, also in the south, but not right on the border. And she says to me, Lyana, thank God that I evacuated after nightfall. Thank God that my children didn't see the bodies on the street, the burnt cars, the shooting. And when I left, people said to me, just drive. Don't stop, just drive. And so she drove, and she made it to her mother's house. And still, it's Saturday night. We still don't know what's going on, but we understand that it's very, very bad. 2 days later, her mother calls me and says to me, how do you feel about refugees? I said, so she packed up and she came with her special needs daughter and her special needs grandson. And now I have them living in my house for 3 weeks, which is fine. I was used to it. They did it before. But you understand that things that are evolving and developing, totally not normal. And there's still fighting going on. And there's still shelling going on. And there's still missiles going on. And there's people who cannot be evacuated, whose bodies cannot be identified because the severity of the way that they were mutilated and burned was horrible. So that by Friday, we have 2 funeral processions of 2 soldiers from my city, from my neighborhood, that were going to come through our streets. And we all want to go to the cemetery, but you know what? You can't. Because when you've got missiles falling, there is a limit to how many people can congregate because it's not safe. But everybody wants to help, and everybody wants to be involved, and everybody wants to feel that they're doing something. And everybody wants to show their respect. So what do? I'm sure you all know that in Israel we don't do anything without WhatsApp. WhatsApp is like our God, right? And so there's a WhatsApp group that is opened, and a message goes out. We're all going to stand at 9:30 in the morning on the streets with our flags, and we're going to be there in order to salute and pay our respects. And so spontaneously, everybody comes out. And the flag that a week ago was the most divisive thing ever has become the unifying factor of who we are. And when this funeral procession finishes, there's another one around the corner. And as we're walking from one side to the other, my neighborhood has many, many Anglo families who've made Aliyah, and I hear a child asking his mother, Ima, is it Yom HaAtzmaut today? Is it Independence Day? Right? And she says, no, why? And he says, so Ima, why are all the flags out? And I tell you that if that was my child, I don't know if I would have known what to answer. But this woman was unbelievable. And she turns to him and she says, my darling, right now, every day is Independence Day. And so I want you for 1 minute to feel with me what it was to stand on the street on that Friday morning at 10:30 as the procession was going. And then this happened. So when we talk about the fact that the flag has now shifted from being something dividing, it's not just the flag. The spirit, the unbelievable understanding that this is something different and it needs a different response is everywhere. When you drive through Israel today, wherever you go, you will see these flags, Am Yisrael Chai, it's on everything. This is the airport last week when I flew out. It is everywhere. It is on your packaging, it is on your beer, it is on your frozen chicken, it is on your toilet paper, it's on your paper towel. It is everywhere. And it's on my nails. I mean it, it's everywhere. And why do I say that? Because that's where we are. That's where Israel is, and still 122 days into the war, that's where we are. But what happens when everybody wants to actually do, right? So if you remember on October 6th, or leading up to October 7th, right, with all the demonstrations, they said, oh, the reservists are not going to show up, and the pilots are not going to show up, and no one's going to fight, and we're at a terrible, terrible state. And you know what? On October 7th, October 8th, not 100% showed up, 150% showed up. And those who could not were begging to be taken. My husband was 54 years old, and he still thinks that he's Rambo, okay? But he hasn't been in reserve for a decade. He says, I'm going to get myself called up. And he called everybody that he knows, and he was begging everyone. And I said to him, no, Avram, you're not going to get called. No, I'm going to get called up. He didn't get called up. But like him, so many people, all they wanted to do was just go and fight in the front line, because the understanding is that this is different. This is not the same as things that happened before. And my daughter, Reut, who is the older of my two daughters. She's 23 years old. She was a commander of a war room on the border in Egypt. And she said to me, Ima, if this had happened 2 years earlier, it would have been me. Now, what does a mother do with something like that? But you know what else? The war room in Nachal Oz, where all of the women who sit on the monitors and the cameras that the terrorists disabled so that we wouldn't see them, the commander of that war room was my daughter's soldier. She recruited her and she trained her. So in Israel, everybody knows someone. Everybody is connected to someone. October 7th is not, some random attack where maybe we know one or two people. There's not a single person in Israel that is not affected, that is not connected, that is not intimately affected by what went on. And when we went to her funeral, it was like, for her, it was like going to her sister's funeral. Okay? And so she says to me, Ima, I can't just sit here and not do anything. I have to do something. So it takes her 3 weeks, like her father, but she gets herself called up. And she is now going to the north to be the commander of a war room in the north. Now, while she's not going to the front lines, she's going to a war room. And the things that she's going to see, and the material that she's going to be dealing with, and the difficult situations that she's going to have to deal with at 23, you understand that I wasn't breathing so well, okay? And how is she going to get there? How is she going to get there when we still have missiles raining down and we still are under attack? Who's going to take her? I can't leave. So when I say everybody wanted to do something, those who couldn't put on their uniform enlisted themselves in all sorts of other initiatives. One of them was people who got in their cars and started to drive. At their own expense, they were crisscrossing the country, taking the soldiers from here to there and from there to here, and taking care of whatever was necessary. So she calls this network, and this guy shows up at our house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Of course, I have to go down and see who he is, so I'm not sending my daughter just with anybody. And he says to me, my name is so-and-so, and I live in Haifa, and I've been up since 5 o'clock this morning, and I've already taken 3 soldiers to 3 different bases, all the way down by Mitzpe Ramon, and I was on my way home, and I get the call, and I said, I cannot go home empty. I'm going to take your daughter, but I can't take her all the way, because she's got to go further north than where I live. So I've already contacted somebody else who's going to meet me on the way, and is going to then take her to make sure that she gets to the base. These are my people. This is what was going on in Israel. So what does a Jewish mother do? He's been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. What do? I make him coffee, I bring him brownies, I bring him chocolate chip cookies. I want to make sure he's taking good care of my daughter, right? And she goes off. And I don't know when exactly I'm going to see her again. But the saving grace was that my brother, who's in the other picture, is also called up, still in reserve. And he is in charge of all of the medical, should we say, issues and procedures in the north. And so they're together up in the north, and at least I know that she's not going to be on her own. So when we talk about these reservists, who are these people who are leaving their homes, their families, their children, their jobs? What happens to their businesses? What happens to? But everybody drops everything. And in Israel, when I say everybody, I mean everybody. From the star of Fauda, through famous chefs, through famous performers, anybody who was anybody dropped everything, and he was fighting since October 7th until he got injured 4 weeks ago. And when he posted this picture, he said, this is not a scene from Fauda. This is real life. So when we talk about these reservists, it's important to remember who they are and what that means when 300,000 of them are enlisted on October 8th and they all go to war. They all have families. They all have responsibilities. But they've all dropped everything because this is a different war. This is a different reality, okay? And one of the things that they are still talking about today, and while this is, a little bit old already in terms of the date, this is still relevant. What they are basically saying is anybody who is saying anything that is divisive, that is not unifying, that is not in tune with what we want to do, the campaign is tistemu, shut up. Meaning do not distract us from what we need to do. That white noise, not now. Okay? And basically, that's exactly what he's saying. He's calling on everyone. If you have nothing positive or unifying to say, just be quiet. So whilst he's famous, there are plenty of other reservists who are not. And I want to share with you the story of someone who touched us very, very, very deeply. This is Shauli Gringlik, and he is a combat soldier. And he had a dream, and his dream was to be a singer. And so while he is serving in the reserves, he gets invited to the Israeli America Has Talent, or American Idol. So listen a minute. Let it play.
כמה שנים בזבזתי בלהיות כמעט.
Notice he's in uniform.
כי לא ידעתי איך לגלות לך את חולשותיי. גם לעצמי סיפרתי סיפורים עליי. אני עטלף עיוור, צועק את חיי בחושך. אני ישן וליבי ער, אני נרקומן של אושר, כותב בלילה שיר, זה מנקה ממני עצב, כשנגמר לי האוויר, אני בוכה לבד ברכב, ואת
Okay, you get the idea. He touched everybody very, very deeply. That today, when we hear that song, we don't think about the original performer anymore. We only think about Shauli. The tragedy is that 2 weeks after that performance, Shauli fell. And what you guys just did, in Israel we did tenfold. Everybody was devastated. Now, he wasn't anybody famous, but you heard his beautiful voice, and you saw his amazing performance, and you saw his dedication, and this man was willing to sacrifice everything because to him, even though he performed and he passed, that was not important right now, because what was important was to go and fight for the country. And what's even more amazing is that when his family got up from Shiva, they needed just to clean their head a little bit. And so they went down south to the Arava, and they got an Airbnb. Down there in the Arava, most of the people who live are not religious. It's a religious family. They were saying Kaddish. How is he going to say Kaddish 3 times a week when there's no minyan, there's no synagogue? Okay, so the daughter writes a post, and she says, we're coming down, we need a minyan. If anybody, can maybe come and help us make up anybody. This is only part of the number of people that showed up 3 times a day, every day, not religious, Muslims don't even know how to pray, just to be there in order to be that support system. On October 6th, you could die 3 times over, and they would say, forget it, we're not coming. It's unbelievable when I talk about this shift, which is incredible. And what the mother says is she says that the thing that moved her the most was the people who did not know him, but came to say thank you. And she felt this unbelievable hug. So she doesn't watch TV, and she doesn't read the newspaper, because she doesn't want to be distracted by all these voices that are trying to take away the amazing feeling of hug, love, support, and unity. And what she says today still, she is interviewed and she speaks out. She says, thank you to the people of Israel. These are my brethren, and I will draw strength from them, because from the ground up, that's where we are. This is Aryeh. Every time I do this, I say I'm not going to cry. Aryeh is my best friend's brother. And he was 39 years old. He was a commander in the tanks. Wife, 3 children. And when he went to war, he was given the opportunity, the option, not to go and be a tank commander, not to put himself in harm's way. There were plenty of other important jobs to be done. And Aryeh said, no, this is what I know how to do. This is what I'm going to do. I need to be there with my soldiers. And so Aryeh, they had just built a new house on a new kibbutz. He got time off to move his family into the house. He spent 3 days in that house. He went back to war, and he didn't come home. Now, what does a family do when they've moved into a new house and a new community? Who doesn't know them from Adam? And now they have to sit Shiva. And the family is, when I say mixed, I mean that they are ultra-Orthodox, modern Orthodox, secular, and this is a secular kibbutz. They need to eat. Who's going to cook food for them? So, if this were not post-October 7th, it's not my problem. But post-October 7th, not only did they show up and build unbelievable tents and said, whatever you need, we're here, they contacted all of the communities around the kibbutz and asked who would be willing to help. And they got dozens of families who were cooking meals 3 times a day, but not just cooking them, bringing them and clearing them, and whatever was left, we're donating to the soldiers, right? And when they brought the food, there wasn't even a name on any of the food so that they could thank these people. All it said was with gratitude from the Jewish people. This is unbelievable. Now, I could tell you 50 million stories of this. I just chose a few. But every single one of the stories is exactly the same. So what we experienced pre-October 7th and where we are post-October 7th is very, very, very different. And I share this with you because that is the drive behind what is happening in Israel today. And in addition to the reservists, we have to remember that there are young soldiers, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, who are also fighting. And 3 weeks into the war, Lavi Lipschitz, who I've known since the day he was born and grew up with his mother and is a member of my synagogue, falls in action. Now, how do we as a community deal with that, right? We have all dealt with grief before. Unfortunately, Israel is not new to this. But when it punches you in the gut, when it's a child that you have known from the day they were born, and as a community, I will tell you that now, every week, our Divrei Torah are still dedicated to the memory of Lavi. And we are still, as a community, dealing with this very, very deep loss. But what's amazing is that Lavi, and he's not the only one of my friends who's lost, every single one of these kids who writes a letter, what they say is, if you are reading this letter, then clearly something has happened. But the message is the same. All of these 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds is, my life is not worth more than anybody else's. I am fighting for my country. It is my duty. I am honored to die. Please do not be sad. Be happy. Please make sure that the society that we have is worthy of the sacrifice that we made. Now, whilst I at 52 could write something like that, the fact that someone at 20 could write something like that tells you that this generation that we call the TikTok generation, that we were sure was going to be stuck to their phones and wouldn't step up to the plate, has been the most inspiring generation. My daughter lost her best friend on October 7th. My other daughter, her friend lost her cousin. I mean, everybody knows. My children recognize that it is their generation now that is paying the price. They should not have to be dealing with tens and tens of funerals that they are going to. But what's amazing is that this generation is incredibly inspiring. And when you take these letters and you go back to 1948 and you read the same sort of letters that were written then, it's exactly the same. Because this is 1948, 75 years later. We are fighting for our survival. And when I say we, I mean we. Whether you live in Israel or not, this is our battle, and you feel our pain and you understand it. And so the school is now dedicated to Lavi, and we understand that he gave himself in honor and the protection of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. But whilst we talk about those who have fallen, we must also remember all of those who are wounded. And that is a major thing. And we have to talk about what's happening in the medical story in Israel. Because how is it on October 7th that even though you are so ready for mass casualty events, unfortunately we've had to deal with many of them with terror attacks, we're not dealing with 600 and 700 a day. And so as they come in, what do you do with that? And what happens when these ambulances are coming? Who is in the ambulance? Can it be somebody that I know? I can tell you that to this day, when a helicopter lands in one of the hospitals, everybody in the emergency room stops and doesn't breathe. Because who is going to be brought in on a gurney and who is going to have to be treated? And is it somebody that they know or somebody's connected, right? So we are still in the event. This is not post. It is an ongoing event. And all of those who come to Sheba Hospital and the other hospitals, this is what you see. Real heroes don't wear capes, right? These are people who fought, who were injured, and are ready to go back and fight. You know that Hadassah Hospital has opened one of the most advanced rehabilitation centers in the world, but it was supposed to open in April. What month are we? We're in February, okay? So they had to open it because the need is so great. And I bring this to you not only show you, of course, that it's in 3 languages, which are the languages in Israel, but many of the floors are still under construction. I was there. You go there. I mean, it's magnificent, but it's half empty because they haven't even furbished it. And you go into the elevator that hasn't even, it's not paneled properly. And on it, there are all these messages to the soldiers. So who are these soldiers, right? So the first one you can see is Ro'i. I met him, it's now 3 weeks ago, celebrated his 27th birthday. His leg was shattered. He's sitting and he's studying, preparing for his academic year. And when I'm talking to him, he says to me, Lyana, I'm going through the motions and I'm studying, for university. But what I really want is I want for my leg to get better so that I can go back and fight with my friends. And when you sit there with these soldiers, it's like this ongoing after party, right? They fought together in the field. They're now rehabilitating together. And everything that they are telling you is, we need to get better so that we can go back to fight. The mother that I met, her son Eviatar, fought valiantly on October 7th and was injured in many different, in his leg, in his arm, in his side, fought and fought and fought until his body just couldn't take it anymore, right? And then it takes hours to evacuate them. Remember, October 7th, we've got terrorists still running everywhere. You can't just evacuate them, all right? So we have many amputees because how long can a tourniquet survive on your leg or on your arm before? So when they bring him to Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, she's fighting with the doctors. Do whatever you can to save his leg. He wants to go back to fight. Don't amputate his leg. And there's consultations all the time. And every time she says, don't. Only if you absolutely have to, don't amputate. And you know what? 36 hours later, she saves her son's leg. And it's not amputated. And he goes to Sheba Hospital. He's now undergoing long rehabilitation. I bring this to you because the soldiers are amazing, but the support system of the families. We have to remember that the challenge is of the soldier, of course, but of the families as well who have to help them and deal with what happens when you get this message that your child has been wounded so terribly and you don't know if they're going to survive. So Idan Amedi we spoke about. I just want to tell you that when he was injured and he was brought to Sheba Medical Center, and everybody knows who Idan Amedi is, certainly in Israel, he was in such terrible state that he was unrecognizable. And on his arm it said, a 22-year-old unrecognizable soldier. So he's not 22, and he's certainly not unrecognizable, but that was the state in which he was in. And he was in induced coma, and he's now better, and he's been discharged to continue his rehabilitation as an outpatient. But right before he was discharged, he held a press conference. And I bring to you what he said, because while he's famous and he had a press conference, he's not saying anything different from what everybody is saying. So our mission as a nation is to stay united, not to fall apart, to prove to those who fell in defense of this country that their sacrifice was not in vain. My body was injured, but my spirit is stronger than ever. I will go back to creating, to singing and acting, and with God's help, I will go back to fight for my country. The Israelis are the strongest people in the world. When we are united, we are invincible. It will take time, but we will win this war. We have no other choice. So who are these soldiers, right? I said to you that we all wanted to do something. We all wanted to be involved, right? I wanted to be involved. October 7th came and my calendar, which was full for the next 2 years, was now empty. And I wasn't working, right? So I wasn't working making money, but I started working for the soldiers night and day. And when we talk about unity, what is unbelievable about this is that my friend started to drive the soldiers around. She gets a request from a unit up in the north. They need mystery books for the secular soldiers for when they're not on duty, but they also need spiritual religious books for the religious guys. So she says, you know what, I can find the mystery books. I'm not religious, but how am I going to start to find all this religious stuff that I don't know anything from this? So she calls me up. She says, Lyana, I need your help. Make a long story short, we organize everything that they need. We send it up to the border, and these are now our soldiers, one of the many units that we have now adopted. And you can see that what we did is we basically are helping them with all of the non-tactical equipment that they need in order to make their service easier. Sleeping bags and tents and coats. But when I say we, I mean we. When Jill talked about the letters, listen to what they say.
Who donated these jackets for us. Thank you so much. Here in northern Israel, weather can get pretty nasty, so you guys are keeping us warm, and our hearts are also warm because of you guys standing here with us. Thank you so much. Am Yisrael Chai.
It's not just us, it's everybody, because when we are together, they feel your love and your support even from across the ocean. One of the other units that we helped also with jackets and other things, the day after we got them their jackets, they were the ones who were lying in the dark and were protecting our hostages as they were coming home from Gaza. How amazing was that to get this message that says, thanks to the gear and the coats that you provided, we are able to be here and to protect our hostages. So this is a way for us to feel that we are engaged and participating in working together. When I said strong in the home front means strong in the front lines, that's exactly what I meant. And one other thing I want to share with you, because one would say, okay, Lyana, the first week, the second week, the third week, we're now 122 days into the war. These initiatives, all right, it's enough already. People are going back to work. No. What you see here is a junction next to Ofakim, which was an empty lot. On October 8th, 2 businessmen came down there and opened this center where they were providing whatever the soldiers need. And to date, they are now, every day, barbecuing 10,000 hamburgers. And there are people who are coming to give them haircuts, and to give them manicures and pedicures, and to give them physical therapy, and to do whatever it is that they need. 4 months in, still going strong. My sister-in-law is the one all the way on the right. The chief Sephardi rabbi came down last week in order to give them a blessing and to commend them on what it is that they're doing. Who would have thought? Certainly not pre-October 7th. Some of the other things that I just want to quickly share with you that also talk about this unity is challah bakes. And why is that? Challah bake is a challah bake. But when I have a friend who's not religious who says to me, Lyana, I've never been to a challah bake before. Maybe I can come and see what it is. Okay, and she comes, and we stand together, and we say the blessing for the soldiers, and we pray for the healing of the soldiers and for the safe return of the hostages. The fact that she would come, and then her daughter says to her, Ima, this is so inspiring, I think we need to do it at home, is an unbelievable thing, of bringing people together. This was done in memory of my daughter's friend who was killed on October 7th. And this was done in memory of my friend's, of my other daughter's friend's cousin, who was killed at the Nova. And when we send these to the soldiers in the front line every week, and I do this every week, this is why you guys need to put your numbers on, because you're going to get responses of thank you and unbelievable, and it feels so good, right? Not just that we're bringing them the challah, but that more importantly, that we're bringing them the love and support to know that they are not alone, okay? I even do them on Zoom, so maybe we can do it once together. One of the other amazing things is the cakes. And why is that amazing? Because when you want to get something to the soldiers, right? My friend said, okay, we have our soldiers, let's get them something for Shabbat. It was Thursday afternoon. She says, I don't really know anybody. I said, don't you worry. In the Orthodox community, you say cakes and you say challah, that's mobilizing people to action. So Thursday afternoon, I sent out a message to my community. Friday morning, I had 120 cakes, already with notes to send to our soldiers. And again, you get all these amazing thank yous. One other amazing thing I want to share with you when we talk about unity is something else that would not have been possible pre-October 7th, and that's the different youth movements that come together, the Scouts and Bnei Akiva, to meet the soldiers at the bus stops and at the train stations to say thank you. Thank you for their service. Thank you for doing what they do, but to do it together. And this is what Jill was talking about, and this is what I want to share with you. The Western Wall can be a place that is not always a place of unity, okay? But as of October 7th, this is a place where people come together. So this is an unbelievable show of solidarity. Religious and secular, Tel Avivis and Jerusalemites, kibbutzniks and settlers, and everybody in between, coming together, led by all the chief rabbis, in order to pray for the safe return of the hostages. The hostages are front and center in Israel. But what the hostage families said was how incredible it was to feel that love, that spiritual uplifting of everyone coming, praying together, no matter who they are or where they come from, because this is what's important. And because the Western Wall is not only a religious site, but a national site, there are now 1,400 candles that are lit every day. 1,400 for the initial number of the murdered, the massacred by Hamas. And there is also a place where you can find the name of anyone that you know, so that you can light a candle and bring the light. Remember what I said? This is not about right or left. This is about light versus darkness. Light in Judaism, what was the first thing that God creates? Light and darkness. So we want to create that light. And this billboard in Tel Aviv, never Never. Except that now, ever, all the time. Here's one other thing I think we need to talk about very quickly, and that is the evacuees. And the reason I mention the evacuees is, again, this is something that nobody talks about, but we have 300,000 people who have been evacuated from their homes in the south and in the north and are living in hotels. Whilst it might be nice to go to a hotel for a weekend, it's not so great when 4 months in, you have 5 people living in a room with no privacy, with no space, with no ability to make a cup of coffee, I know it sounds crazy, but to do laundry and to cook dinner, this is something that they can't do. The simple, normal behavior is impossible. And they will endure this. Why? Because they are not going home as long as evil is still on our border. And this is what I want to sort of reiterate. As far as Israel is concerned and the Israeli public is concerned, ceasefire is not on the table. Because a ceasefire means that Hamas remains in power in Gaza, and Hezbollah remains in power in the north, and October 7th can happen again and again and again. So we cannot afford to allow that to happen, and our civilians will not go home. The Israeli society will not survive if this is allowed to remain. And this is what I meant when I said that the way things are perceived in Israel are different from the way they are perceived outside of Israel. Because would you live on the border knowing that Hezbollah is about to shoot at you? Would you go back to your kibbutz when you know that Hamas can invade again? That's not what you'll do, right? And so the mundane things of cooking a home-cooked meal, which sounds so ridiculous, is unbelievable. And my friend opened her house to an evacuee family so that she could cook a home-cooked meal for her family. And when the father sat down and ate this bowl of soup that his wife made for him, all he did was cry. Why? Because the sense of normalcy, this ability to try to connect to something that was lost before, was very, very, very powerful. And so I share all this with you because it's important to understand where we are coming from, which is not always the same where others are coming from. And what do you do with all of what I've just shared with you? And you just need... Do that with me a minute. So I've now been talking and talking and talking, but this is what we need. We need a minute to be able to just breathe. But where can we go to just breathe when our tiny country is even tinier because of all of the threats that we have? And when is it okay to just go out into nature for just a moment and just stop and just take it in and just be able to say, okay, nature is healing. Nature gives me the power, the resilience to be able to go on. But what happens when you go into nature, and it's not just about going on a hike, because you encounter someone who's wearing a backpack with all the pictures of the hostages. And when my friend asked him if he wanted to join her hike, and they started to talk, he told her that he is the grandfather of a grandson who was massacred by Hamas on October 7th, and a granddaughter who was held hostage in Gaza. So even something as mundane as trying to breathe in nature becomes not so mundane. And that's why, we are still very much within it. We are still doing our bit in order to try to help and support the economy and help and support the farmers, because you have the reservists who can't work, and you have the Thai workers who have not come back. And if we do not pick the fruit, not only don't we eat, but we're not supporting the families who need to be able to live. My finger, guys, I went every week. My finger right now is not working. Seriously, not working from all of the extra physical activity. And you know what else is happening in Israel? When you go to the supermarket, how do you know that what you're buying is Israeli product? How do you know if maybe some of it has been imported, because some of our vegetables come from Jordan, for example? And how do I know if I want to support that? So you know that there's a law now in Israel that you have to mark so you know where the fruit and vegetables come from, so that you can choose what you want to buy. We just had Tu B'Shvat. What do we eat on Tu B'Shvat? We eat dry fruit. In Israel, a lot of the dry fruit comes from Turkey. I'm not buying from Turkey right now. Most of us are not buying from Turkey right now. But how are we going to know if it's not marked? So the mundane things, of going to the supermarket and buying things and eating have to be supported by those of us who can go. So entire units take time off to go and pick, and entire companies take their workers to volunteer. and students are getting scholarships in order to go and help and support, because this is the joint effort of Israel's resilience and survival. And the last thing we'll talk about is language, because language is also important, and associations are important. So yellow is my favorite color, and yellow is usually a great sort of happy color. But as I said to you, just like in the Holocaust, there are certain things that today have taken on a different meaning post-Holocaust. In Israel, this is what yellow means. Yellow is not a happy color. Yellow is the color of the hostages. Okay? And I said to you, we have 136 of them that are still being held in Gaza. And so they are very much everywhere as part of the conversation. They're on our walls. They're on our museums. They're at our train stations with an empty yellow chair until every single one of them comes home. And one of the biggest debates in Israel is not whether they have to come home, because if they don't come home, we will collapse. Israel will not survive. But the question is, how do we bring them home? And what is that price that we pay to bring them home? And what does it mean when you are brokering a deal with a terrorist organization, which means that you are in fact enabling them to do it again and again? And are you going to do it from a place of strength or from a place of weakness? And we're not united on that. I will tell you that there are many different debates within Israeli society. What is the right thing to do? And if I had a family member in Gaza, you can bet that I would do everything to bring them home. But what does that mean for the greater society? Do you remember when Gilad Shalit was taken, and after 5 years we released over 1,000 prisoners, one of them being the wonderful Sinwar that we have now? So for one, we paid 1,000. Now we have 240, 136 left. What happens next time? Will we have 500? What happens after that? Will we have 1,000? What happens? What do you do? I don't have an answer for you, but I'm sharing with you the internal debates that are going on in Israel. And I promise you that they have to come home. It's not a question. Because if they don't come home, we're done. But if we do have a ceasefire, I can also promise you that from an Israeli perspective, it is a temporary ceasefire to bring them home. What I do want you to know is that they are very much in the forefront of the conversation. And the set table that you all know is very, very different today in Israel, because we remember that half of them are still not home. And the table is not complete. And this is where they are being held. Close to 400 miles of tunnels under Gaza, bigger than the New York subway station, bigger than the London Underground, bigger than the Paris metro. How do you fight a war that is not really above ground but is below ground, and nobody has ever done it before? And how do you do it when you know that your hostages are still there? What are you going to do? These are challenges that Israel is at the forefront dealing with that are very, very complicated. And so when you go to Hostage Square, there is a new installation to help you remember that this is what we're dealing with. But you know what the difference is? When you walk through that, first of all, there are messages to the hostages when they come home. Because whilst Hamas leaves them in inhumane conditions, we have recreated a tunnel that at the end it says, Vayehi Or, let there be light. Because we are hoping to bring them home and bring them back into the light. But they are everywhere. In Israel, they are everywhere. You buy your coffee, and they are there. And therefore, when we think of orange, this is what orange means. Do you remember that we still have 2 very, very young people that were not released when all the other mothers and babies were released? That's what orange means in Israel today. And what does red mean today? This is what red means today. Darom Adom, which used to mean something else, a red south, right now reminds us of what happened on October 7th. But I will tell you that we are now striving for it to return to mean what it did before. Because Darom Adom, red south, reminds us of the beautiful anemones that flower at this time of year with a festival, and that's what people associate when they think of a red south, not blood and destruction and devastation. And so now what we're doing is we are bringing the color back to the south. And the color's back. That's 2 weeks ago. They are beginning to bloom, and they will eventually come back to that. Because the resilience of Israel is that we don't want to be stuck in the Darom Adom of what the terrorists did. We don't want them to dictate to us what our reality is going to be. We want to go back to that. And so, while I said to you that we pray for the safe return of the hostages, and we pray for the safe return of our soldiers, and we pray for the healing of those who are wounded, this video is one of hundreds of videos that have basically become the mantra, because the song that you'll hear in a minute has become the anthem of the war, not written during the war, but the message is this: it is in the dark hours of the night there will always be a small star to light your way home. It is always darkest before dawn, but I'm going to add, and then comes dawn, and then comes light. And when the light comes and we are reminded that that's what it means, then we don't stay in the darkness. So this is what
עוד יבואו ימים טובים גם בשעות החשוכות של הלילה תמיד יהיה כוכב קטן שיעיר לך את עצמך את הדרך הביתה תמיד זה הכי חשוך לפני הזריחה מיליון רכבות דוהרות עד אוסטרליה מחפש רחוק.
Okay. So before we end, this is the message that I want to leave you with. We all talk about Am Yisrael Chai, and that's become very much, it's not a slogan, but it's an expression that we really live by, and it very much represents how we feel. But I don't know how many of you know where it actually comes from and when it began, because we tend to think that it's just always been there because it's so much part of who we are and what we sing and what we reference to. But the first time that this expression was used, and I take you back to the beginning of our talk, was when the camps were liberated. And in fact, it was recorded on BBC when one of the Allied forces came to one of the camps, and they were accompanied by a British rabbi who saw the skeletons of human beings rising up in order to greet them as they came into the camps. And the first thing that he uttered was, Am Yisrael Chai, meaning in spite of what the Nazis tried to do, we're here. They were not successful in annihilating us. And that sentence was then taken by Shlomo Carlebach and was put to music and became the message of the Free Soviet Jewry. But before we say Am Yisrael Chai when we sing the song, there's a sentence that comes before it, right? Od Avinu Chai. And Od Avinu Chai actually comes from the story of Joseph when he meets his brothers, because the very first question that he asks them is, Ha'od Avi Chai, is my father still alive? And Shlomo Carlebach says, it's not my father, it's our father, because we are all children of Israel. We are all descendants of Israel. And so this idea that we are all together, we have all come back, and we are alive because we are all from that same root. And so when we talk about Yachad Nenatzach, we are going to win together, and that Am Yisrael Chai, it's an unbelievable thing. Yes, a terrible tragedy happened on October 7th. Our choice is, what do we do with that tragedy? And Israel has chosen the path of unity. With all the white noise that is there, and nothing is perfect. Nothing is perfect. But at the end of the day, you feel my pain, and I feel your pain, and we are together in that. It is lonely, it is scary, it is difficult today to be Jewish. Anti-Semitism is rampant everywhere. And I was told by my friends not to come because it's dangerous here in America. You laugh because when you want to come to Israel, they're going to say, are you crazy? You're coming to a war zone? Let me tell you, you may just feel a little bit safer in Israel based on what's happening here right now. But at the end of the day, what is our responsibility, I think? We have to speak up. We have to make sure that we are part of the conversation, and that Am Yisrael Chai is not just an expression. It is very, very hard. And those voices are trying to drown us out and are trying to speak up and tell a different story. And we have been conditioned for a long time. Let's just wait till it blows over. Let's not upset the people outside. Things will get better, right? In Hebrew we say, Yeh beseder, it'll be okay. Well, no, it will not be okay if we are not actively engaged in the conversation. We have to be there, and our voice has to be heard as strong, if not stronger, than the other voices that are trying to silence us out. Because if we don't, we've lost. And our claim is as legitimate, it's actually more legitimate, because anybody who can see in their heart to endorse murder, to endorse rape, to endorse annihilation, to endorse genocide, and to blame the Jewish people of committing the acts that were committed against us in our right to stand up and defend ourselves needs a bit of a morality compass check. That's where we come in. We have to help them reroute. We have to help them get with a program. We have a choice, as I said. We live in historic times, and we can be part of history making. And what is the choice that we're going to make? This is not Israel versus Palestinians. This is not even Israel versus Iran. This is a global issue. And what is going on in the world today, what is going on in America today, the signs that I see here are extremely disturbing. There's freedom of speech, but we're not. And we also have to be there as strongly or stronger. Because if we don't, we've lost before we've even begun. We are an eternal people. Our job is to be a light unto the nations. It's a very, very difficult task that we've been given. But we are partnered with God to be agents of change to make this world a better place. Let's work together in order to make that happen. Let's not be silent anymore. Let's stand up. Let's speak up. Let's be a part of the conversation. Let's dominate that conversation so that we can make it so that the voices of good stick out. Because at the end of the day, this is for all those who want to be part of humanity, who want to be part of good. They must align with Israel. Because if they choose the other side, they have chosen evil and they have chosen darkness. So we're going to end with this, which to me is very, very, very powerful, and you're welcome to join in.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות. כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי, בעליות בירידות, גם בשעות הכי קשות. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא עבדה האמונה. עם ישראל, עם ישראל חי. עם ישראל חי. אור ארצי נחלתנו, לא תיפול כעת רוחנו, מסביב ברזל של חרבות. ויונה תפרוס כנפיים, התקווה בת שנות 2000, עוד נצא לשיר ברחובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי, בעליות בירידות, גם בשעות הכי קשות. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא עבדה האמונה. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו,
Yisrael Chai. Let's make it work together. Thank you. Sure. Yeah, of course.
We have about 10 minutes for questions, if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. No, it's a lot.
You mentioned Gilad Shalit, and I'm not sure, I tried to look this up and I couldn't find it, but I heard something about saying, please can hear me, heard something about him saying that had he, thank you, about Gilad Shalit, had he known that one of the men that was let out for his release would have caused this, he would not have chosen to do this. And I'm not sure if you had heard that and how you feel about that.
So
just wanna ask.
2020 hindsight is a very dangerous thing, I think. I don't know what he knew or what he didn't know. I don't know what he would have chosen or not chosen. When you sit for 5 years in captivity and you are disconnected from anyone and everyone, it's very hard to put that on him. No, hold on. So I'm just saying, I have not heard him say today that had he known that Sinwar would have come out and this is what would have happened, that he may have made another choice. And I don't think anybody expects him to say that either. It's an impossible situation to be in. And I didn't mean to put it on him. What I'm just saying is that Israel as a society understands that when we negotiate with terrorists, which we didn't do in the past, and when we pay these heavy prices, part of that is what we get. And so when you sit down and try to reconcile all of these issues, and you're not 1 versus 1,000, you're 240, now 136, and you're dealing with families who are campaigning, rightfully so from their perspective, to bring their loved ones home, alive if possible, and if not dead, to be buried, that's a very big burden. And they're there because Israel failed them. They're there because there was a breakdown. There was no army. There was no government for 8 hours. We, the people, stood up and did what the government should have done, right? So we have to deal with that. The question now is, how do we deal with that without jeopardizing Israel, further to an extent that may, down the line, now that we see, not that we didn't know before, but that we see what's going on, how do we do that in a way that, you can make that happen and still somehow keep some semblance of, it's an impossible situation. And I will tell you that the families are not united either in terms of what they are saying, because there are different families who feel differently, and there are those who say we will do anything and right now at any cost bring them back, and there are those who say no, not at any cost, because right now it's my child, tomorrow might be your child, right? And so how do you deal with those different voices as well? And when you meet with them, what do you say to them, right? I mean, I wouldn't know what to say to them, right? And who am I to say it to them when I don't have a child or a husband or a relative who is sitting there rotting in the tunnels in Gaza? So I can only share with you the impossible situation that we're in. Gilad Shalit has been very, very quiet and very, very private since he was out. And other than knowing that he got married, we know very little about what he thinks and what he feels, and I'm sure that he's in an impossible situation. We also don't know where he is emotionally, where he is psychologically. 5 years at the hands of Hamas, what does that do to someone? So, I'm sure this brings up all sorts of other things for him. But he has not been part of the conversation at all. But thank you for that. It's a very, very important question. Any other questions? Oh my God, I've stunned you. Go ahead.
What is happening with tourism in Israel?
Excellent question. I'm the right person, right? I will say that very early on, there were already groups that were coming in what we call solidarity missions, right? And people that were coming to volunteer, people that were coming to bear witness. And that's continuing to happen in larger numbers. There are also people now that are coming on their own. And they're coming on their own to combine volunteering with touring. There are 2 challenges with that. Many of our hotels are still holding hostages, so there are not as many places for people to stay. Some of them will be evacuated, hotels will be empty as of March, because as I told you, some of them are going to be going back to their communities. But that's the one challenge. And the other challenge is that while you're coming to Israel, there are still certain places that you can't go. But what I will say is this. I encourage, not because it's my job, but I encourage people to come because I really do believe that what you will experience in Israel now is what you have never experienced before. And you can combine touring in plenty of places together with other unbelievable volunteer initiatives that will enrich you so much more than the people that you are helping. And by coming and spending money in Israel and pouring money into the economy, you are helping the economy continue to fuel it so that we can then do what we need to do as part of the war effort. The war's not ending tomorrow, but we're not all living in our bomb shelters. And we get up in the morning and we go to work and we sit in cafes and we go to restaurants and we go to museums and we go out in nature and we do whatever we need to do. So I know that what the news shows you is one thing, but the reality on the ground is that most people are living a very, very, regular routine under the situation. Missiles are also not flying. I don't know what will happen if a front is opened with Hezbollah. If or when, depending on who you talk to, because that's a totally different story. And the arsenal that Hezbollah has and their ability to hurt most of Israel and all of our strategic infrastructure is huge. But right now, that's not the reality. And Hamas, in fact, is not shooting a lot because they don't have, and they're being very, very selective. And unfortunately, again, where they are shooting is around the area of the Gaza envelope, which reinforces what I said, because the people don't want to go back to that. And when they talk about rebuilding their communities, they're talking about rebuilding homes without safe rooms, because they don't want to go back to that reality again. But yes, people are coming. I encourage you to come. Not only to give people like me a job, but more importantly to come and experience and to come and bear witness. It's very, very important, because even with what I showed you, it's not the same as going and seeing it. But when you go and see it, you have to know that you're not going on Disneyland. You're going to bear witness and to leave. It's not this sort of ongoing sort of experience, but yes, thank you. It is happening, and people should come. Please.
The United States government is obsessed with talking about what's going to happen to Israel and the Palestinians after this war. It's bordering on the obnoxious. It seems to me that Israelis, I won't say could care less, but it's the last thing on their minds at the moment. And I don't quite see how, just I guess politically, how those two states can reconcile each other, or maybe they just won't reconcile each other.
You mean Israel and the United States in terms of how we see things playing out?
Yes, and our obsession with now the opportunity to create the two-state solution.
So I thank you. That's an important question. One of the reasons that I said that friends can also disagree is exactly that, meaning that it's important for me to say that the alliance and relationship with the United States is very important, not just because of the financial aid that you give us, and not only because of your ability to veto things in the United Nations, but because in the core, our two countries stand for the same thing. We stand for the same values, and we stand for the same principles, and it's a very, very deep relationship that nobody in Israel wants to jeopardize and throw out the window. But, and here's the but, there also has to be an understanding that Israel is not the 51st state of the United States, and that Israel is an independent country that has a responsibility first and foremost to its own citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish. Anybody who is a citizen of Israel, we have a responsibility to defend and protect them. And I also think that it's important that we acknowledge that we are the only country that has to continuously justify our right to exist and our right to self-defense. And so the United States right now, being an election year and all sorts of other things, is motivated by other interests. But I also think that the United States is hopefully waking up a little bit, given what happened with the attack on your base in Jordan, and given the fact that you made a coalition with Britain and began to hit back, and have said clearly that this is just the beginning of a pronged attack, which is the Israeli perspective of what we've been doing, that what we hear publicly is not always what is going on behind the scenes. And that there are certain things that leaders have to say to appeal to this base or that base, and don't always reflect the conversations behind closed doors. I think that one of the statements that was made today to Blinken, who was in Israel, was that Israel is very clearly not going to go for a ceasefire. It was said very clearly, and that Israel is going to go to the end with what we need to do, because while we cannot destroy the ideology of Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and all these jihadist regimes. What we can do is destroy their ability to govern. And what I always say to people when they say to me, how can you do that, is think of Germany and think of Japan and think of where they were during World War II and where they are today. So those ideologies still exist in the world, but they are not ruling regimes. Okay? And so part of the conversation is that we have an obligation, but we need your support also in the international arena because we need the time to be able to do what has to be done. And Israel could care less because we don't live in a vacuum. We don't live on Mars and we don't live on the moon. We live in this world where there is a growing voice that is trying to pull us back. And so for those who understand what we are doing, we need the support. We need the help and we need those voices to be heard. But that's why I said that we also have to stand up and we also have to speak out because we cannot only leave it to the politicians. Voices that come from the ground, look what happened. Israel is united not because of our government. My father sat on my couch on October 7th. He's a very smart man, my father. And he saw immediately what was going on, and he said, we are an amazing people that our government doesn't deserve. It's an amazing thing. It's very true. Well, we are people that can come from the bottom up, and we can also apply pressure. And if we are silent, then things just happen. But if the base speaks up, and we are also a base that needs to be taken into account, not just those other voices, that also has an impact. And it has an impact on the international arena. So how are we going to reconcile it? Very carefully. We're going to manage it very carefully, but Israel has made it very clear, time and time again, that we are not stopping because we cannot afford to. And when I said 48, I meant it very, very seriously. This is chapter 2 and hopefully the end of the war of independence. What we didn't finish in 48, we now have to finish now. Because between the river and the sea is not about us and them from their perspective, it's about them only. And I'll say one other thing that I think people don't remember. A, we have tried time and time again, even before the state was established, to offer all different solutions that were rejected every single time. Because you know what? The Arabs have said from the very beginning what they want. And we haven't listened. If we only do this, and if we only do that, and if we do they haven't moved. They have not moved. So it's about time that we stand up and take notice and understand that they have told us what they want and don't want, and now we have to tell them what we want and don't want. And it's not only about appeasing them, but about recognizing that there are other voices that need to be heard. And that's why, to me, coming to the United States and sharing my story with you is to tell you where Israel is, but to also rally all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean all Jews around the world, wherever they may be, to stand up. We have to speak, because if we are quiet, our voice is not heard, and it's not taken into account in the conversation. And then we are not the base that has to be taken into account, because we haven't said anything. But the people who are sitting in this room clearly care, because otherwise you wouldn't come out at 6:30 at night in the darkness on this cold evening to listen to some person who came from Israel to blabber for an hour and a half. But you care. If you care, let's do something about it. Let's make sure that we together can be heard so that our voices are part of the conversation. And then when the administration decides who they have to speak to and who they have to listen to, we are also there. Not exclusively there, it'd be nice, but it's not going to happen, but that we're also there. So I think Netanyahu is in an impossible situation, and it doesn't matter right now if it were him or anybody else, because anybody who now is at the helm of Israel is dealing with an impossible situation, and we may like him and we may not like him. It's not relevant right now, and Israel is not there. We're not talking about elections right now, we're not talking about replacing him now, even though many of us don't necessarily like him and even think that he may be a liability. We understand that we cannot be distracted. So all of these people coming and talking, it is important that we take with a grain of salt what we hear, because they're not going to share everything in the media, because you're not going to tell your enemy what you're doing. And the voice that you say, I'm not saying that it doesn't represent, it does, but it's part of an ongoing conversation. I think what's more important is what we're not hearing, and what happens as a result of what we're not hearing. Okay? I don't know if I answered, but we have to wrap up. Okay.
Thank you all. I'm Stephanie Elkind. I'm on the board of Wayland. Thank you so much.
She's going to give you the mic so they can hear you.
I want to thank Lyana so much. This is my second time today hearing her, and I could just keep listening, and I learn something every time she speaks, as she did every day of our trip when we were in Israel 8 years ago. She's a treasure, and we're very lucky to have her here, and I hope you all took something from this very important presentation and discussion, and I thank you so much for coming out tonight too. And if there is food left, which I'm sure there is, we ask that you take some home with you, wrap it up. We have foil and paper plates. Take dessert, because none of us want to take it home with us. We want to share it with you. So again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And one more time for Lyana, please.
Good job. Good timing. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent.
Yes. Oh, gosh, thank you.
Thank you.
Will this be online later?
It will be live.
Yeah,
it will be on
it was recorded.
YouTube, eventually, maybe tomorrow. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go travel. Will you send me to travel with her?
You never introduced us.
This is my boss.
Hi, Lino Coverage. I'm the CEO of Jewish Family Service at Metro West.
Will you send me to Israel now?
Sure.
Let's organize a
Take
trip.
me with you.
Let's go. Let's organize a trip.
Oh my God.
Really
That
important
was
stuff.
so empowering and so beautiful. It really was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And,
Thank you. Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, good luck to all of us. All of us.
Where are you going from here?
I'm in Boston until Thursday morning.
I heard you keep talking to the kids
I
here
am.
Wednesday night.
I am.
Thank you.
Oh, don't thank me. It's important.
Yeah, I'm going to give you my card.
Yes.
Please connect with me.
I have a card in the office if I
great.
can give it to you as
Yeah,
well.
because
I would.
there's a lot of different people that want to go to Israel and do
I
like
would
a
love that.
volunteer project,
Yeah,
but
amazing.
then do a tour. So
Yeah.
maybe they could connect with you on that part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you need the senior director of philanthropy.
Yeah, you need to be here raising money.
You need the senior director of philanthropy to lead that trip.
Yeah.
I'll get you my card in a minute from the office. My pleasure.
The guy went to high school with me, now lives in kibbutz in Moshav Dan, and
Which is where?
in the Arava. It doesn't matter. He's in Israel. John.